Okay. Hi, Candy. Are you ready for another treat? You spoiled dogs. She's so spoiled. Sit. Good boy. Candy, sit. Good girl. Okay. Hello, and welcome to Life Made by Hand. I am your host, Angelique, and today I'm going to be fixing the hem of this skirt. So I originally sewed it not very well, so you can see it's kind of fraying here. So I'm going to rip it all out and redo it. Need a seam ripper to start with. And my friend strongly suggested High Cipher. We've got a couple helpers here. Friend strongly suggested getting a good one with a nice grip, because if you're going to be holding it for hours and hours on end, you need not to want to pull your fingers out by the end of it. To rip a seam, simply hook this under, you rip it out. It's not very hard. And I know my first instinct is to save that thread, because there's a lot of thread in my case, and say reuse it somewhere. Unfortunately, both the act of sewing with it and pulling it out like this thoroughly weakens the thread. So if you try reusing it, and I have tried, then it will snap very easily. So while it hurts the reuser in me, it's best to just throw it out. Pause this so I rip out all the seam. Alright, so a nice little pile ripped up thread here. And our seam has now been liberated. So what I'm going to be doing, turn this around so you can see. So originally what I had done is just taken this and folded it over once. As you see, it's been that way for a while. So the seam is nicely pressed in. What I'm going to be doing is folding it over once to meet that original fold, and folding it over again. So not using any additional fabric there, but making a much tinier seam. And I do so by hand. You might notice a lack of a machine anywhere near me. That takes a minute, as you might imagine. So what I generally do is I go through, use safety pins because they stay, and I will be using them to pin that initial half seam, this guy, and then going through with either more safety pins or my handy dandy straight pins. And the reason you want to swap out the safety pins for the straight pins is because you can't sew straight pins to your whatever you're sewing. I'm not saying that I've sewn this little loop onto one of my skirts in the past, but I have. So find the seam I was starting at, and so with this I had sewn the hem and then sewn the seam here. So this part I don't really feel like redoing even just that little bit. So I'm going to be hijack doing a half seam. Probably going to make that look really strange later. But sometimes things are a lot more effort than they are worth just to make it look cutesy. And if you want to make it look cutesy, that's fine. Just go up however far the seam you need. But okay, so safety pinning it first half step, and I'll see you back when I'm ready to start the next bit. Alright, so first round of that initial fold has been done. So now I will go through again and fold this part. And hopefully this seam right here will not turn out crazy looking. It'll probably be slightly more awkward than if I had been doing this from scratch, which should be a future video. Fabric is currently in the laundry. As I was doing this, my mother decided to come out and asked why I was doing it this way instead of doing both folds at once. And the answer is because that is how my brain works. But if you're comfortable doing it the other way, go for it. The trick is to find a method that works for you, not because somebody told you to do it that way. Sometimes that way is correct for you, sometimes it is not. I'll be going through re-safety pinning. As I go, I will be undoing some of these other ones because the new safety pins will go through all the layers of fabric. And then once I finish with that, I'll be able to go through and start sewing, which will again involve removing the safety pins and replacing them with straight pins. So yet again, I'll see you on the flip side. Okay, so we have pinned the skirt thoroughly with the safety pins. And I realize that's a lot of pinning, it's a lot of work. I usually do not have any particular timeline. I'm not doing this on a schedule. I'm not doing it for anybody but myself. And I do it to relax and give my hands something to do while I'm watching television or a movie or something. So I tend to overpin, make sure everything is firmly in place, because among other things, since I'm doing it by hand and I take so long, I will have to set it aside and go do the laundry, go to work, go bother the dogs. So I use very few safety pins, or I use very few straight pins, and majority of the time have safety pins going around because they don't come undone, whereas safety pins will come undone and stab you in the foot if you're not careful. So, to switch out from safety pins to straight pins, because again, you don't want to sew your safety pins, or maybe you do, I don't know. I won't judge. So you see, I've already started, got that seam here, got it out of the way, have my first pin on this side of the safety pin. What I'm going to do is making sure I'm within the seam, so I'm not just pinning one layer of fabric. And I'm going to right about where this is pinned in, and next to it I start the next safety pin. If I think I need more between it and the next one, I'll put another one there. Like so. These are a little hard to see. They're a bit smaller than ones I'm used to using. Then I can take out this guy and safely put it in its container. And I have this small stretch of fabric that I can start sewing. Where I'll probably start sewing is right here after the seam, because that way if I need to redo the seam, I'm not having to take out the hem at the same time. So, get about 6 inches worth of fabric that's done with straight pins. And that's usually enough to go on for the first little bit with the thread. And then we can pick out our needle. So a hem going to be very teeny tiny stitches when you're doing it by hand. I've never used a sewing machine, so you'll have to go elsewhere for that. So this is a typical needle. It's a little bit long for our purposes. We're going to have teeny tiny stitches, so we want a teeny tiny needle. This is about the smallest one. I know it's not that much smaller than the one I just held up, but it's tiny. But I'm not going to lose it. Yeah, unfortunately, this sewing box that I'm using has been in use long enough. We've lost about half the needles. So this is the smallest one I have available. About a little more than an inch long. And there is no thread at Walmart. I was just there this morning buying these pins. So I'm using the some of the thread that was already in the box. I've got these two greens. They don't look very green on the camera. Well, this one does. That are probably the closest match to this fabric. And if you hold them up, wow, that looks very blue against it. But with the naked eye, not this funny camera, the teal color is going to match much better with the fabric. You can see that. And given that this is the bottom hem of the skirt, if I was doing the side seam, I'd be a little more concerned. If it bothers me later, I can always go back again and fix it. But for now, I'm going to be using the sky. I have to look it over, find that. And you do not want to get too long, because that will tangle up. So about, I don't have my arms fully extended. There. Little bitty pair of scissors. And the fun part, threading the needle. If you have to find a needle threader and use it, there's no shame in that. I use it for some of my threads just because they do not want to be threaded for anything. But the trick the way I was taught is to hold the thread in one hand and move the needle onto it. Of course, I've never done this on camera. I might have to go find a needle threader. Problem with teeny tiny needles is they've got teeny tiny eyes. Haha. But there's all sorts of tricks and tips on how to thread a needle. But again, if you have to use a needle threader, don't let anybody tell you it's wrong or that it doesn't make you a real artisan. And I was taught to fold it over and tie a knot very near the end. Something with very loose fibers between it, you're going to want a larger knot, but this is just regular old cotton. And Mom is making a face. Mom, do you have commentary to add?
As far as the needle threader?
Yeah.
Some of us have failure trimmers.
Ah, yes. Good point.
When you get older, and eyes don't always work as well as you get older.
That's a very good point.
But you're implying that there is something wrong with the needle threader.
No, there's nothing wrong with a needle thread. I've used a needle threader. And she has a good point. She's got familiar tremblers. It always tangles my tongue. So her hands shake badly. So yes, in that case, needle threaders are super, super helpful that way. I've also had... This channel does not support child labor. So, as with this needle, it has a teeny tiny eye. I could just barely get to it. If my thread had been any larger, and I do have some larger thread, like upholstery thread, it's hard to thread. So yes, use a needle threader if you need it. Haters gonna hate. Okay. Gotta check in with the dog. You gonna let me catch you on camera? Hi, baby. And this is my helper, Cypher. Or at least his nose. Definitely not spoiled. Okay. So the original stitch that I had used was a very long, loose stitch. And the problem with that is that my toes would frequently catch on it when I was trying to put this skirt on. So what we are going to do today, get this up in here. What I am doing is going under folded edge and up, pulling the thread through, and it's back again. I'm not sure how well this is catching on camera, honestly. And it doesn't need to be super, super tight. Well, you should pull the thread taut, but not strangle it, because that will snap your thread. Have to go down, catch it on the outer edge, and bring it back up through the folded part. And the tailors and seamstresses of yore were able to get these tiny, tiny, very neat, very even stitches. You might notice I am not a seamstress or a tailor of yore. And one way to check that you're actually getting through it all the way is to turn it over and see if you're catching that tiny bit right there. But you don't need very much on the outer side. Just enough to catch all the folds. And just keep going. I have somehow gotten blue on my hand. Probably from these scissors. Tendency is to have a teeny little pair of scissors like that for cutting threads. Probably a holdover from days of yore, when all things were made by hand. And usually when I'm doing this, I like to watch a movie, watch a documentary, listen to music, listen to one of my podcasts. But since I'm planning to make my own video from this, I don't want to have copyright issues. So I'm going to sew to the end of this thread and show you how to tie it off a knot, because you should not have a huge length of thread. Not only does it weaken the thread every time you pull a stitch through, which again is why you aren't able to reuse the old thread, but it also runs the high risk, pull you out, runs the high risk of getting it tangled, which means that you'll end up having to cut it, and that just wastes all that thread anyway. But I find it very soothing to just one stitch at a time. Because can you imagine sitting here and every time you have to pull a stitch, you have to pull your arm all the way out? So far, wow, you can't hardly see those. tiny row of stitches just along the edge of the seam. That's all you really need, at least for a skirt like this. You're making a hem that's going to go on the clothing of some small child that is running and jumping and climbing up trees and bothering the squirrels. You'll probably want not just heavier fabric, but heavier thread and stronger stitches. That will be for another time. So one day I'm going to learn how to sew trousers. You will not want to use a teeny tiny needle and everyday use thread for that. For now, just happy little stitches. And whenever you get to past one of your straight pins, you can take it out because it has done its job and done it well. I do have thread that properly matches this fabric, however, it, like so many of my other belongings, is in storage. Now we'll see it again one day, maybe in a few weeks. And it's alright if your stitches are larger or smaller and not perfectly even and neat. Because if anybody wants to criticize your stitches, ask them how well. Oh, you want us to criticize my stitches? Well, you can't criticize the stitches of strangers on the internet. So there. Haters gonna hate, as kids these days say. But unless you are entering some competition, at which I applaud you, I sew for my own giggles and amusement. Nobody is going to look at the hem of your skirt and say, oh, your stitches are not evenly placed, and that one is larger than the rest. Nobody's going to be looking at the bottom of your skirt. So I'm not too bothered that the thread doesn't perfectly match. If I want it to be really fun, I pull out a hot pink or a dark purple and hem it that way. Because in the end, what matters is that it makes you happy. And I had one friend who did not want to start knitting or crocheting, other things that I kind of know how to do, because it frustrated her that when her stitches did not come out perfectly. But if you never start, you will never get better. And most of the time, nobody is going to know the imperfections except you. My current knitting project, I can see where I somehow flipped the entire pattern so that the right side is now the wrong side and the wrong side's the right side. I don't know how I did that. But I'm the only one who can see it. I've shown it to other people. I've pointed it out to other people, and they just kind of shrug at me. Most folks are going to be impressed you can do anything at all. most of the time. Same goes for cooking of any degree. As long as you don't burn it or poison somebody, folks are going to eat it. Unless you're my mother, who thinks I don't salt anything enough. She adds far too much butter to any of the bread that I've baked. She's also ignoring me. In case you're wondering, yes, I am currently living with my mother. We are in the middle of a pandemic. I do not find the need to rush out and get my own house, especially since my dog lives here. The dog is also ignoring me. He's camera shy for some reason. I can't figure that one out. You don't even know what a camera is. You don't. And yet you're avoiding it. How are you doing that? There he is. This is Cypher. He is 12. He is a Chow German Shepherd mix. Can you say hi to the internet, baby? He is very spoiled. Thinks he's a lap dog. Which is why he keeps coming up here and giving me soulful looks because I'm sitting in a chair. That doesn't allow for him to climb into my lap like he used to. So, run out of safety pin space. So now I'm going to have to put some more straight pins down. And yeah, a sewing machine would get this done in a blink of an eye, but it's also rather noisy. People hem with a sewing machine. I've seen it. Somebody does not get on YouTube and watch Bernadette Banner, who does all the things with her cute little Edwardian sewing machine. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Sewing machines are old, Mom. So, starting to run short, I say that, on thread. Won't be much longer before I tie it off and cut it. It's something I've noticed with myself, no matter which project I'm doing, whether it's sewing or crocheting. I haven't done enough knitting to know if I do it there too. When I'm getting to the end of my yarn or thread, I sometimes will go faster. Like I think if I go fast enough, I'll finish the project before I run out of it. It's the silliest thing. But as long as it doesn't hurt anything. Hold that out. a little too close to the fold. Okay. So, make sure you can see that. We've got this much thread left on the needle. So what we're going to do is do one more stitch. But instead of pulling it all the way tight, we're going to take the needle through that loop, and pull it into one knot, and hook it through again, through that same knot, and make another one. That way it's firm in there. The string is not going to come loose. And snip it out about as close as you can without cutting the knot itself. And there you go. One almost invisible row of stitches. And now to do the rest of the skirt. So, have fun. Alright, not quite finished, but we have a small interruption because the parental unit wished to demonstrate the way she was taught to him. Slightly different than I basically self-learned a lot of what I did because I'd run off and was elsewhere by the time I decided to start being interested in sewing. You can't exactly demonstrate that over the phone. So, this is a pillowcase that is being used for my own nefarious purposes at some point in the future. And what she would do, see if I can get up and demonstrate for the camera, is she'd go in about the same way that I was. Go in and just catch it a little bit and come back under. And whereas I would just pull a straight loop, she would have it looped around so that you have a line going here. Whereas what I was doing, which she pointed out is nearly impossible to see between the thread and the tiny stitches, I was just doing this. This is very hard fabric, and since we're going through the top of the pillowcase, it's many stitches. So this is what I was doing, which is just single looping stitches. She has it connected in there. Possibly adds a little bit of strength. Possibly just looks nicer and makes it less likely to catch on things. But outside, theoretically, you should have teeny stitches. This is both very thick fabric and two uncaring people who are doing it more out of demonstration. But
I wasn't taught that you needed it to be teeny tiny stitches.
That's fair.
But him, he's looking at the hem.
Make the hem as big as you want. Make it in bright contrasting colors the way this is. You don't have to match it exactly. Now the return of the seam ripper. So, if you don't know how to use one of those, basically get the pointy end, hook it under the seam that you're wanting to rip, just pull. It should be sharp enough. So this is very pointy, and there's a semi-sharp edge right there between it and the dot. You should be able to just rip it right through.
And in your case, it's just you set the knot and just...
That's what I did. I just wanted to demonstrate the use of the seam ripper.
Okay.
And plus, I'm going to use the non-sharp end to kind of pull these stitches out, because it's a little easier than trying to yank them out. Ta-da! And now we have random yellow thread. Remember to hydrate. Well, I hope that you found that interesting, and hope maybe somebody even found that informative. Just keep in mind, what matters is that you are happy with the result. And even if you aren't happy, you can always do what I did and go back and redo it once you have more skill at whatever project you're working on. These skirts were made a couple years ago, and by skirts I mean the one I'm also wearing at the moment. They were made several years ago, and now that I've gotten better and learned more stitches, I'm redoing some of them. Eventually I might attack them and add pockets. Won't that be a fun adventure? So yeah. You don't have to have teeny tiny stitches. They don't have to be cute and even and perfect. As long as they hold, really, is what matters. So, it's been Angelique with Life Made by Hand, and I'll catch you later.